Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of How to Sell Your Vision. As always, our goal is to bring you successful founders who have raised funds for their startups and partners from VCs who can share with you their insight on how to raise in today's market. And today we have a really interesting story that is going on with our guest, James Morris, who is the founder and chief product officer at Buzzable. And I think you're going to get a lot of insight from James because he's doing what many of our listeners are trying to do, is successfully raise pre-seed in the early stages of the company where most of us are at pre-product, pre-revenue stages. So how do you deliver that pitch confidently, successfully, and get the early funds you need? You're going to hear it from James today. James, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks, Moti. Happy to be here.
So before we dive into pitching, storytelling, and your insight on how to raise pre-seed funds, walk us through Buzzable a little bit. Kind of interesting thing what you're doing there.
Definitely. Yeah. So you can think of Buzzable as LinkedIn for events. The event space today is super transactional. You buy a ticket, get an email confirmation, and show up. And after that, there's really nothing that happens. And a lot of event creators we've talked to say that their no-show rates are pretty high. They have trouble retaining attendees over time, and this really impacts them poorly in regards to their growth and how they're able to monetize. So what Buzzable does is we allow event creators to tie their events to a community so that when people join their events, they get added to a chat room so that the event creator, the attendees, and event sponsors, everyone who's there at the event can communicate with each other before, during, and after. And we really helped event creators grow their reach and their number of attendees doing so.
And I've seen the companies already run for about 2.5 years almost, and I know you had very successful early traction. We spoke about the fact that within 2 months, you already showed revenue in the company, and I can see why. The value prop is so promising. But I'd love to take you back to the moment in time where, just like any founder, you realized we need to raise money for this thing, and we're starting with pre-seed funds. So if I'll ask you, and that's the hard question. I like to start with the hard questions first and then go to the easiest ones later. But if you were to see a founder right now who is going to raise or is about to raise the pre-seed round, what would be your number one advice to that founder?
My first piece of advice would be to ask them if they've talked to users yet. A lot of us kind of find ourselves as very early stage founders, kind of coming across like, oh, I have this really cool idea. I want to start a company around it. I want to start building right away to solve for this problem that I think exists. But I would advise them to really talk to users and understand whether or not this is actually a problem worth solving first. There's so many times where we have an idea and we want to build towards it, and then we talk to users and they're like, oh, like it's actually like not too big of a problem. I've actually experienced it myself with a couple of former companies that I founded. So that's the first question I would advise everyone to ask themselves before they even take that step and building, before they even take that step going and raising that pre-seed.
That's interesting you're bringing it up because I interviewed a lot of investors who are investing in early stage startups, even in the pre-seed and seed stages. And that's the one thing they said as well. I want to know that the founder in front of me really hustled his or her way through, surveyed the market, did the homework, understand there is a problem, understand there is a demand, and they understand their advantage going into it. So I think that legwork that you're describing is not only good for the founder, kind of as a reality check, okay, there's something real in my hands, but it's also important to show to investors that you have done the legwork.
Exactly. Is a lot of former friends and even family members have previously told me failing the plan is planning to fail. And if you don't know the pain point of a particular user persona that you're solving for before you even dive into starting a company or raising capital, If you don't fail early on, it could set you up for failure relatively quickly. And often that's why the majority of startups fail, is they have, this problem that's not worth solving, or they're not able to pivot towards the problem that they should be solving.
And what I love about your story is that, in many times the pre-seed rounds typically go to friends and family or pure angel round,
Mm-hmm.
but you were able to raise from institutionals your
Yep.
pre-seed money.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to ask you, at that stage, everyone is talking about storytelling, the importance of storytelling. How do you mix that into your pitch? And how are you able to establish that connection with institutional investors so early on?
Great question. So the first piece is finding institutional investors that are willing to invest very, very early stage. And by very, very early stage, I mean pre-seed. There's many VCs out there that are seed focused and are kind of pre-series A, but I'd say that the first piece is finding the ones that are pre-seed or even idea/concept phase. There's a few out there. They're kind of few and far between. They do exist. Accelerators as well. And then once you find, say, an institutional investor that's focused on that very early stage, I feel like the biggest piece of storytelling is start with something that kind of triggers a gut punch, something that kind of triggers emotion. If you just tell just like a story of like, oh, we talked to 1,000 users and they were having this pain, and so we built this, like it's not something that really kind of shakes someone and makes them feel like, oh wow, this is something that has a lot of potential, it has a lot of impact. This is something I want to put capital into this early on.
Yeah, trigger a gut punch. I love it as well. Again, you're touching on so many key points because again, I see so many founders today who are following the traditional pitch deck template. They're coming in with the problem, the solution, the product, and it's very technical. And just because you have a good problem and a good solution doesn't mean you can connect an investor to it. And what you're saying is very powerful because you're saying create the emotional impact first.
Right.
Create kind of this emotional provocation in a positive note and a trigger that positions you above the threshold and all the other presentations they're seeing.
Exactly.
Interesting. How did you come about to formulating your pitch? How did you realize that's the story you want to tell?
So it took a lot of iterations. When we first started working on Buzzable, the way the vision started was just kind of with this happiness problem that's kind of going on in the world right now, where people are becoming more and more socially isolated. They're on their phones. It's almost as if social media is kind of pulling people back from the world instead of putting them in it in order to make those strong connections. That was kind of the emotional kind of formulation of Buzzable. And initially, we're more so just a social platform that was getting people out into the real world without necessarily focusing on community or focusing on connections, or kind of some of those things that I touched upon that actually provided kind of tangible business value to event creators. That's where we started, kind of based on that emotional storytelling foundation. And then over time, as we talked to more and more event creators, as we did more product discovery, we started to realize like, hey, like this industry, this event space, it's people are currently kind of operating in it on the wrong footing. It's like they're going out and hustling and posting all over social media to try to get people to come to their events. They're cold emailing event sponsors. They're doing all of this stuff, and they're not building upon community or kind of creating a like an environment for themselves to kind of grow that organically and keep everyone in touch. And as we worked with more event creators and attended more events and just kind of understood their way of doing things, we found this kind of core fundamental problem with the space, and that's what eventually kind of pivoted us into building Buzzable and focusing on community. Same emotional foundation about people kind of being detracted from the world in this day and age, not being as social. That's kind of like the big picture why that we still have in our pitch to this point, but just a refocus in regards to the actual product that we brought to market.
That's interesting because it's key, at least when I work with my clients, when we're talking about pitching, is to communicate the process transformation, right? Because investors are investing in the process transformation, and you're coming in and say, look, traditional event promotion, event communications, cold email, social, text, there is a natural filtering mechanism to all of those activities.
Yes.
Why won't we change the way we go to people and be where they are and where they feel comfortable and engaged, and leverage that environment, which is, to your point, happier as a point of conversion? It makes perfect sense.
Right.
Very cool. So we spoke about storytelling. We spoke about the need to kind of grind and show traction, in a sense, not only in numbers, but traction in demand. So a lot of time for early stage companies where they don't have the revenue, they fear that the traction question is going to come up. But traction is not necessarily revenue. It's your ability to show demand and have people saying yes to the product. How did you approach this in terms of your research, your validation, and communicating that validation?
It's a great question. So once we kind of pivoted into like the problem space that we should have been focusing on, which is community, and kind of tying it back to that emotional foundation, the way we were able to kind of display that traction to early stage investors, even before we had like the numbers piece and actual revenue coming through the board, was being very clear and simple in regards to articulating the problem that we were solving for and the solution that we had. We started off with a bunch of information on slides to try to educate like investors, tell them about the event space, and try to paint like a picture of what we were solving. But we found that the most effective way of doing that was to do more with less. So just 3 words, super large font on one slide, even if it looks super basic, is going to probably deliver the message that you're looking to convey to investors far more better than filling up an entire slide trying to get them on the same page that you are, like as a founder.
Got it. Love it. One more question. This one might be a tough one. Depends on how you look at it and how much are you willing to share. What is the toughest question you got from an investor in your pitch? Could be in the first meeting, second meeting, but what is the one that you thought to yourself, okay?
That's a good one. I'd say the toughest question that we received, that kind of takes practice over time, because different investors kind of ask different variations of it, is why you? What's your competitive differentiator? Like, what sets you apart over everyone else in the market? And you have an inclination to kind of go towards like a simple answer is like, oh, our UI is better, or we have AI,
Right.
built into it, something simple like that. But you need something more profound, more articulate to truly answer that question. And for Buzzable, it's that community piece. It's like, hey, there's this fundamental problem with the event space. We're completely flipping it on its head and going after building community instead of transactions. It's all about community instead of ticket sales. That's kind of the approach that we took. But it's definitely been the hardest question to answer, because investors, they'll ask it like that, why you? Or it seems like your vertical is extremely saturated. There's a bunch of competitors. Aren't people already doing this? And trying to convince them that, like, no, you're really setting yourself apart. You are truly unique. You have a USP. That's definitely been the hardest question I think we've been asked by investors as we fundraise.
It's right on, because again, I'm speaking to a lot of investors, and they're saying the same thing. Early stage companies, we invest in founders. Again, market problem could be great, solution could be amazing. We need to understand why you. There are two questions that they're always asking: is why you and why now? And it's incredible that you brought the why you, because I don't think that a lot of founders who are not working with a consultant are preparing themselves to answer that question. And many of them, it varies, maybe shy in explaining why them. But the key is that everyone is an unfair advantage. Everyone is an unfair advantage in an industry. Everyone has a problem to solve. And if you can connect both of them and allow the investors to really understand why you are your own competitive edge at that stage of the company.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, you don't have to be, the first to market with something. You could already be in like a very saturated space. There can already be, dinosaurs that have been doing kind of like a variation of what you're trying to accomplish, for the past 2 decades. But as long as you're doing it different, you're doing it better, and you have something that, really can't be duplicated, whether that's the team or like the core technology, and you have like that core USP that really sets you apart, that's everything. That's actually kind of what gave us the initial fundraising traction that we experienced.
Got it. So I'm going to end with one last question. Buzzable sounds fascinating. I can see why you were successful in doing what not too many founders can do: raise pre-seed from institutionals. What's up next for Buzzable? Should give us a few words about the future and what should we expect from your incredible company?
Definitely. So we're currently preparing to raise a seed round in early next year. So that's what we're up to from a fundraising point. But we're also looking to really scale up the number of event creators that we have on our platform. So we have more and more event creators joining every single day, whether it's people creating small activities like dinner outings, all the way to more institutional event creators that are hosting conferences throughout the Bay Area. We're also onboarding event sponsors as well. A lot of event brands, they like to sponsor and kind of put their brand out to a very close, engaged, large audience. And with our event creators growing their community, the potential with event sponsorship is as well.
Sounds amazing. Well, to everyone who is listening, if you are in the event space and you need the conversion, you need to try a different way, reach out to James. Look out Buzzable. I'm pretty sure you'd be happy to get people to reach out to you, James, if I'm not mistaken. So
Absolutely.
Check out Buzzable. Amazing solution. I'd love to kind of keep in touch, James, because I think you have pretty powerful insights. Maybe even do another episode after your seed. Thank you so much for joining the show. And I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to share everything with our community.
Happy to help, Moti, and thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, James. You have a good one.
Thanks. All right.